Hey folks, this is Harold Goldberg, president of the New York Video Game Critics Circle. And as you know, we're doing this awesome series on immortality. And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Natalie Watson, who's the producer of the game, and Isaac Espinosa, our senior intern and mentor, is going to do that interview. So I'm going to sit back and I hope you enjoy the talk. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
All right. So first of all, Natalie, Miss Watson, it's so wonderful to meet you. I'm so happy that you had the time to talk to me today. It's really an honor.
Of course, I'm perhaps more excited to talk to you. I'm really excited to hear about what you've been doing and what you work on. And yeah, thank you for reaching out. I'm
Absolutely.
super stoked.
All right. So first off, I want to start with a nice little icebreaker, start a little nice little thing to get us started. So first off, what is your favorite video game franchise? If you don't mind me asking.
Ooh, franchise. That's an interesting question. Hmm. I would have to I mean, the first thing that popped into my mind is are the Legend of Zelda games. I would say, like, in terms of a franchise, those are the games I've played the most of within a single franchise. I mean, I've played almost every Pokemon game, and I've played a few of the Souls of the FromSoft games, but not all of them. So I feel like I'm always gonna play the new Legend of Zelda game. That's a given. So I would say probably the Legend of Zelda franchise.
That's fair.
Because
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say because everyone feels like they're trying to do something different, or they're either expanding on or evolving a certain expectation or convention that we've become accustomed to, and really iterating on that in like a very fun, experimental, like sometimes challenging way. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say, personally, my favorite Zelda game has to be probably Wind Waker. I think the art style of Wind Waker is really nice. I think it's super fun to look at, and more importantly, I think it's my Toon Link is my favorite iteration of Link for his charisma and for how he actually feels like he kind of develops as a character. But what is your favorite Zelda game, if you had to say?
oof, I would say, and this is probably controversial, but it's tied between Breath of the Wild and Twilight Princess. I
Twilight
think,
Princess, really?
yeah, I love Twilight Princess. I think I loved that it had such a dark tone. I really loved the like visual style of it because I think it was very bizarre and like not really like palatable. It felt like it was a more of a risk-taking game. And I also loved like the tier collecting mechanic. That was always like really fun. I was always really excited about entering a new area and finding all the tiers to for that area. So I think it's funny because I think a lot of what I loved about Twilight Princess, it feeling like this like almost this like more open world, every the sort of collecting mechanics and these slightly darker themes. I think Breath of the Wild took and like just expanded beyond my greatest expectations. So like all the Korok seeds, there was like that type of collecting thing, if you, or even side quests and things like that, if you wanted to get into that, as well as just the exploration of that game felt kind of uh it reminded me of aspects of Twilight Princess. And I love Wolf Link. I love Midna. It's a good, some of my favorite characters for sure.
Oh yeah, I honestly think Twilight Princess has a lot of the darker elements, but now that you mentioned like that, Breath of the Wild kind of takes what Twilight Princess had. It definitely
Mhm.
like kind of shows Breath of the Wild. It's like more bleak story because like it's like the Guardians kind of destroyed everything in the
Yeah,
past,
and
and it's
Link
been like 100
lost.
years. Yeah, no, everything is literally completely like gone, and It's literally, you feel like the silence of the wild in a sense.
I love that. That's a really good way to describe it. The silence of the wild. It 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 is so haunting walking around some of those like old ruins or discarded guardians, and it's like you feel that time has passed and that battles have been lost and people are picking up the pieces from a former age, and having to make sense of fragments, having to make sense of things that aren't completely clear or obvious. um yeah, great video games, love them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Honestly, it's funny you mentioned a bit of like darker themes and sort of like going into more like the bleaker tone, since it's actually a great transition into what I love about Immortality.
Yeah.
And now that if you want, we can kind of start talking about the development of that and how that was going for you, like what that experience was like.
Sure, yeah, I mean, gosh, there's like a million places to go with this. I originally came from video games journalism, actually. So my previous experience in the games industry, I was working for Waypoint Vice as one of their live stream producers, and then I also did some writing and podcasting and streaming for them. And then so Immortality and working at Half Mermaid are my first is my first video game and was my first is my first role in, game development. So
Really?
it's been a huge learning experience, but also it's not as for like it wasn't as for I say that, but there wasn't as much that was so like unexpected about what making a game would really be like. I think having worked as a producer at Vice, a lot of those kind of skills and sort of problem solving instincts translated really well to working in game development as a producer. So but yeah, totally, yeah, this is my first round, my first shipped game, my first everything. So um it's been a total whirlwind journey, from beginning to where we are today.
No, I can imagine, since you hadn't worked on a video game before, but you still had like a bit of the skills to sort of
Mm.
like go into the role of like what you were doing. Which, speaking of which, what is actually your job as producer entail? Since you did mention that a lot of your skills at Vice transferred to what you do now, I'd love to
Mhm.
hear like what specifically you kind of like do as the producer.
Yeah, great question. I do kind of a little bit of everything. Sam and I work really, really closely together on a lot of aspects of the project. So I'd say, um, given that I think there are a lot of different types of producers in the games industry and also across, other industries as well. And I think I've had, because we're such a small team, it's just me, Sam, and Connor Carson, our programmer, in terms of who's like a core full-time member of Half Mermaid. Um, a lot of things fall kind of get split between me and Sam. So when I first started, my role was mainly focused on research and development. We spent about a year just researching and developing the scripts, just getting kind of design ideas up and running on like prototype builds and things like that. So the first year was a lot of reading, a lot of, scouring internet archives for like old detective manuals, for Minsky research, or, reading Sam's iterations of the scripts, or like location research, all kinds of things like that. Watching a lot of movies. I don't have a film background at all. So I also feel like I kind of got a crash course in like film history and theory, and Sam is like a walking encyclopedia of film knowledge. So I definitely gleaned a ton from him throughout the research and development process and through production. So I did that, and then as we kind of got closer to video production, I worked on set with Sam. Kind of, I was like the lore master on set,
Hmm.
and if anyone had a question about like when does this take place, and wait, which timeline are we in, and what day are we on,
Hmm.
I had all of that in my brain, and was helping people decipher between the many timelines and layers of narrative that Immortality is. And I also did script supervising on set. So worked very closely with the actors and all the department heads to make sure that like continuity was always being maintained, and that yeah, if anyone had any questions on the scripts and stuff like that, I was able to answer them. So, and then we went into post production. So worked very closely with Sam on, what our what the selects were, and what we wanted to do, how we were going to integrate everything into the game, as well as just like managing our partner relationships, between our friends at Xbox and at Netflix, and doing our PR and marketing together with Sam. So it's kind of like a little bit of everything. But it's perfect because I think I that's very much, I think, how my brain works. I want to understand when I think about something, I want to understand like the whole machine behind it. I want to understand like every little
Hmm.
cog and part that goes into it. Um, and I think the type of role that I have at Half Mermaid allows me to get like a complete oversight into, everything that it takes to make a video game, from, the first piece of code to the first piece of dialogue, and all the way through. Now it's on your Xboxes and PCs, and soon your phones. Um so yeah, it's a very widely encompassing job, but I think it really does work for me, and how I like to approach a project.
It seems like it's a lot, especially like since from what I can tell, from how Immortality was made, it's very clear that there was a lot of effort that went into it, especially when it came to executing the story,
Mhm.
because there were so many, honestly, there were so many points since I ended up watching it with fellow Critic Circle intern Ronald.
Oh,
He's my best
awesome.
friend. He's my best friend. We watched the game together, or he I watched him play, and it was
Awesome. That's
crazy
a
to
great way
see
to play the game.
how much effort went into seeing all the lore bits and seeing how well thought out every single bit was when you zoomed in and then you went to a certain scene and seeing where that took you. It was clear
Mhm.
that that was intentional. Every single like bit of the game was purposeful. There was no moment where there was something of wasted motion. And on that
Mm.
subject, I was actually funny you bring up the lore.
Mhm.
There was something that I was very curious about, and it was something that kind of took me like off guard initially, but I started to get used to it like later on.
Mhm.
What spurred on the idea to scatter Immortality's lore throughout different movie shots and script readings? Like as a
Mm.
producer, how did it help to cut the table readings and scenes? Like how did that
Mm.
like help like to make everything more organized?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, we really one of one of the main goals of Immortality as a storytelling device is really capturing all of the aspects that go into making a movie. So not just, what you see on your at the theater, or on your TV when you're, watching it on Netflix or HBO or whatever. But the process of making a movie. So I think when we approached how we were going to kind of split up these fictional movies and where we wanted to assign things, it was really important to us to say, let's look at something that is seemingly mundane, right? Like a table read, where it feels like this, you might think it's like this kind of like obligation where you're just going through the script, it's this and that. Um, and then you move on, and the real juicy stuff is like it's gonna be in the production. But when you think about the table reads, and it's funny because we were also doing this ourselves, at the same time. So many, many layers of reality and non-reality
Right.
going on. But uh this is the first time actors are meeting each other, likely, outside of like chemistry tests and things like that. You're getting sort of the first bits of direction from the director. You're seeing kind of power dynamics start to emerge and play out. So deciding so the table reads were definitely going to be something we wanted to showcase and use in an interesting way. And then for some, I think, like in Two of Everything, the table reads one of the table read scenes is like the music video awards, video music no music video awards. Yes, we can't use the other one. Like live production, right? So you have people talking about, going between Maria at home watching it on her TV and Heather on stage, or backstage getting her makeup done. And then what the movie would have been is, you're going back and forth between these two like parallel timelines of Maria and Heather and their kind of parallel but different worlds. Um, that obviously would be really difficult to shoot in the way that we were shooting. So that was a natural fit for a table read scene. And I think it's really fun to see Marissa Marcel going back and forth between the two characters in those scenes where she's like talking to herself and kind of you see that kind of uncanny odd doubling thing she's doing where she's kind of going back and forth. So it fit really nicely for that fictional scene, and I think we were able to tell a story beyond just what's on the screen through that, using that as a device. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I can imagine that it was sort of I can imagine there was like a teeny bit of confusion when it came to like the table readings, since you had said you guys were already doing table readings outside of like making stuff for the game, and then you go and then you record one of those table readings. It's basically just like, oh, which one is which at this point? Which brings me to my next question. I gotta know, was there like some kind of master spreadsheet of scenes that you had to keep track of? Was there like, because you mentioned earlier on that you had to go around and make sure when things were being produced and when things were being filmed
Hmm.
that they had to stick to the continuity. Was there like a spreadsheet that everyone had for reference to make sure
Oh
that they
yes.
knew what they were talking about?
Oh yes. Yes, we definitely did. We have so many spreadsheets, but we have one who is the behemoth spreadsheet, which we lovingly call the organizing monster. And that has everything. I mean, is one of the most meticulous storytellers I have ever encountered and have ever worked with. He mapped out everything from like the fictional day and date that a
Mm,
certain scene was supposed to take place on to what time of day are we like shooting at, like are we shooting in the morning, are we shooting at night fictionally, um and then so we had all of those, and then we had like the fictional scene numbers, so we had every slate has its own scene number and everything like that. So Sam and I worked together to develop those so that we always had an accurate um um fictional slate, and then we would have the real slate before it. So yeah, definitely spent a lot of time getting very organized. Pre-production going into the video production um was a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of catching people up on what this story is and how these timelines work. And people caught on so quickly. It was extremely impressive, especially since Sam and I had, we were been working on this for a year, and then here's like a whole crew that has to come in and like understand immortality in
Right.
in a month before we start shooting. But they were absolutely fantastic. It was like the best crew ever, and everyone just loved the story so much that I think it really came through and how dedicated people were to just visualizing that that original vision.
You know, I can imagine that honestly, with a story of this grandeur and this scale, it is very important to be meticulous, since there's a lot of points where you need specific dates, because you need to make sure that those things are well executed in the story, to make sure that things make sense, since it is sort of a murder mystery. You have to with dates, everything in a murder mystery is like uber important.
Yeah.
It's already important in like a normal story, but for like a murder mystery, it's like it's above that now, because now those things are details for evidence, to make sure that
Right. Yeah.
the player understands what they need to look out for. They need to piece together events like the sequence and stuff. So that's very good to see that there was a lot of dedication that went from Sam and you to making sure that the staff understood that. And on this actually is kind of acts as a transition to the gameplay of Immortality, since obviously the gameplay is very unique. It's not like any
Mhm.
game. It's not like any games I've ever seen personally. So I think that a good way to kind of start with that is a question of, it has such a unique premise. You know,
Mm.
like Immortality's gameplay is very much like I mentioned. It's like I've never seen before. What was the focal point of centering the gameplay around discovering clues through searching through film?
Mhm. I think you know, we wanted to Sam's goal in making Immortality was, for so long with his previous projects like Her Story and Telling Lies, people had called them these like cinematic games. And Sam sort of never really thought of them as cinematic, because in his eyes he was like, well, no, the first one is like detective footage. Like it's almost like almost like more industrial than like cinematic. It's like more um what's the word I'm looking for? Like utilitarian than anything else. And then with Telling
Mm,
Lies, it was supposed to feel like you're watching somebody's FaceTimes or Skype calls. It's not supposed to feel like you're watching a movie. So then with Immortality, this was very intentionally, no, we want to make something cinematic that is like deserving and warrants that word. And when we think about like cinematic language, I think Sam was very attracted and motivated towards this idea of um the visual and like visual motif, and um that felt unique to the movies or to film in general. So I think that's kind of where that seed started, um, and wanting to make the focus and the interaction and the engagement all live in this like visual space. Um, and I think Sam was also very inspired by games like, you know, um, Pokemon Snap, for example. He often would bring up Pokemon Snap with us when we were in pre-development, because it was also about what are you what are you capturing? Like what kind of things are you sort of attracted or motivated towards finding or saving, collecting? So that was also very much a part of developing this mechanic, is like the physical capture of an image means something.
I didn't even think about Pokemon Snap. It's actually a really good analogy when I think about it, because there's a lot of points where obviously you're like zooming into the picture and you're like making sure that you get a certain moment, but you don't know when that
Hmm.
moment's gonna come. You don't know
Yeah.
when you don't know like when you should be like zooming into a character's face or a certain artifact. You just gotta like go for it. And it's really interesting because when watching Immortality with Ronald, it almost felt like I was like personally I was the detective, but not even like in a sense of like I was like looking at photos. I felt like I was like in my attic just like
Mm.
going through like a cinematography and watching through like a bunch of collected tapes and like seeing like what's stuck on. And it was really interesting, since I'd imagine that was sort of an intentional feeling you wanted to give the player.
Yeah, that's exactly I think the ideal experience or feeling of experience that we hope for players is to feel like, yeah, you too have discovered the sort of treasure trove of footage, and as you're kind of going down these rabbit holes, more and more is revealing itself to you, and it's just slowly expanding, and it's like, the Always Sunny meme with the red string everywhere. It's like that's
Oh
like
my
your
god.
brain playing Immortality, just getting expanded, getting huge. Um so I think that's exactly, what we're hoping for. I'm so glad to hear that kind of came across for you and your
Yeah, no,
experience.
absolutely. It was like it was literally almost as if I was just like I was literally like spending night after night just looking at footage. Like I would spend my days doing work, and I would go into night up to my attic just watching those like those, not even like cassette tapes, like those roulette type of like films that
Yeah,
you put in the camera. Like I was watching those.
that's
And
amazing.
it's funny that like I bring this up because it goes into sort of like I've seen that kind of like those kind of scenes are
Mhm.
most in horror movies, because some horror
Mm.
movies, they try to hide evidence in like a very obscure place, and the attic is one of them. And on the subject of horror, there's clearly a lot of horror elements inside of Immortality. And there was like a lot of things that I noticed that were a lot of really good ways to build tension. It was like the
Mm.
idea of leaving things unknown to the player, and like creating these abstract ideas that sort of created this sense of dread,
Mm.
like dread of finding out like what the answers were. So
Mhm.
my question to you is, as a producer, was there a way for you to make sure that the tension like stayed throughout? Like what was your primary method to sort of make sure that everything was consistently tense, even when you started finding things out?
Mm. That's a really good question. I think, you know, it's funny because I think I have spent so much time with the game that I I think some of the I've always kind of seen it as like this really unsettling thing, but then I hear anecdote when the game started coming out and people were playing this, they were like, "Oh my god, this is freaky. Like this is a scary, freaky, scary game." And I was like, "Really?" I was surprised by it. But then I watched some people play and I was like, "Yeah, if you have no idea what's like lingering beneath the surface, it is quite disorienting and unsettling." Um I think one thing that was really important to us is being very careful about um when certain things reveal themselves to you while playing the game. So I think that was something that we iterated on a lot in terms of finding, but it's also one of the first things we decided on because, you know, we had to have sort of we had to have that in mind to be able to capture both of like where are things going to transition, where are you going to like kind of cross over. So that was always sort of a predetermined point. And then for that to come alive through not just the video production but also while playing the game mechanically, I think it was like a magic moment. It was like, okay, we knew that this point had to exist. This transition place had to exist. But to see it realized and like manifested in both the mechanic and the video was like it felt like magic, for lack of a better word. So I hope that answers your question. I think there's a certain aspect of it as well that of timing of like, how long has it been since you've maybe experienced something slightly unsettling or what kinds of themes and motifs are you drawn to? The game is taking all these kinds of things in and responding to you
Oh
while
yeah, for sure. Cause
that's happening.
there's a lot of horror games now that kind of focus on, and I've said this plenty of times before to other people, but there's a lot of horror games nowadays that tend to focus a lot on jump scares, which yes, they are effective on what they do, but it's jump scares are always been like a relief of tension, if you will. They
Mm,
sort of act like this, like the tension is the thing that leads up to the jump scare, and the jump scare is what sort of stops it from happening. It's like what
mhm,
FNAF does really well, aside from the fact that Five Nights at Freddy's has its really good sound design and very articulated sense of building dread with its lighting. And it's really interesting because I've always been fascinated with how dissecting a horror game can sort of present the amount of sophisticated like themes and methods that they use in order to actually
mhm,
create them. It's more so than I think any game genre out there, honestly. And
mhm,
it actually brings me to my next point. So we researching for immortality, I came across the term of how people called it Lynchian, which
mm,
is sort of like this, if you don't know, it's sort of like this, it's based off of the film director David Keith Lynch, which is like to say that Immortality used a lot of very meticulous sound design and dream-like imagery to
mhm.
sort of create this ambiguity, this feeling of the unknown. And I'm assuming that that was an intentional design point for you guys.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, it's definitely always like an honor to be compared to David Lynch and his works. He's a huge inspiration for us and is also just you know, an expert of his craft of dealing with, like you said, like you described, the ambiguity, dealing with the unknown, dealing with unanswered questions. He forces, not forces, but he has his viewers sit in what's uncomfortable, and he doesn't ever appease them. He just lets it linger and leaves it unresolved. And I think that's a really hard thing for people to deal with. I think we naturally want conclusions. We want to know what happened. We want, like, as humans, I think we are so uncomfortable with ambiguity. So Sam, we were really inspired by David Lynch through this whole process. And I think I think there's like a great meme of from Sam's first game. It's like of a Steam review um that asked the question for on the Her Story Steam forums of like, this game doesn't really have an end. How will I know when I'm satisfied? And I think that's like the eternal question of sort of Sam's games. It's like, it what is satisfaction? Like, you kind of you write your own questions, you write your own quest lines, you write your own, um you know you determine your curiosity. So it's whatever you find interesting or compelling. That's your quest. That's like that's in your traveler's log or whatever. Um, and your tools are these like scenes that you've started accumulating. This is your inventory. This is what you have to work with. Um, so I think, you know, it was interesting for me approaching this project as someone that has never really done anything non-linear ever in my life as a, creative, and in the past, and also as like a so as a, you know, consumer consuming the product, I was just like, wow, it's gonna be really I guess I'm happy, I'm lucky, I know everything and I have all the
Right.
answers in my brain. And but I can imagine how it's what the really fun thing is going on like Reddit or different threads I've seen on the internet of like people's like theory crafting behind, what really happened to Marissa Marcel, or like certain plot lines with other characters and things like that, and the things that people have come up with. And there's a lot of variety of theories out there, and it's really I think all of it's valid. All of it's kind of like there are these really interesting interpretations of the game. And I think that's what ambiguity does, is it like forces us to talk to each other, to try and like reason things out and figure things out. And I think that's such a special experience of Immortality. Like you were saying, you played with your friend, and I think it's a amazing game to play with friends, because you're like putting your brains together to try and like work these things out, and maybe somebody catches something that you didn't, or maybe there's like they go on a thread that you normally wouldn't. And I think that there's like a magic there of discussion and just talking to each other, um that you can only really get from sort of ambiguity, because then when things are ambiguous or feel unknown, that's when we want to like engage with each other more. It's like, I think I have it figured out, but I'm missing one piece. Like, do you have that piece? Or like, or just wanting to share in that, I think, is a really special experience to come out of a game having.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Honestly, it's really interesting that you mentioned it, because I've sort of been like 50-50 on like theories, especially because I feel like nowadays people are too reliant on needing everything explained to them through a
Hmm.
video or some kind of theory, and they don't let the mystery of the game sit with them like they
Mm.
used to. It's like Immortality is like a game to me that, yes, you can find all the theories you want. You can look up all the Reddit forums or like the YouTube videos. Like MatPat will probably find this game eventually, and
Hmm.
then make a theory on it. And that's what people will consider to be their primary source of knowledge. But I think it's really important to really find a lot of that yourself,
Yeah.
and to be able to experience solving the mystery, because
Yeah.
people don't want to solve the mystery anymore. They just want to see someone else solve it. I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame because it's like it really takes away from the amount of time that
Mm.
you and the other members of the staff put into creating the mystery, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I ultimately agree with you. I think, there's some people who just want their questions answered, and that's fair. And, but I don't think that's not the true, like, I don't know. There's no true satisfaction. The game is what you make of it. But
Of course.
the satisfaction that I think I'm geared towards is like discovering things for myself, is having open-ended questions, is having like things to mull over and things to kind of that stick with you, and that you still need time to kind of figure out and process, and maybe you won't really figure it out, but the fact that the question's there is like it's like a charged thing. I think that stuff is really fun. That's like what's fun to me about these kinds of games. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like one of those things where like even when you walk away from the game, it's still a question that's going to be sitting in the back of
I
your
love
brain
that. It's
until
awesome.
you answer it, because like you need to have that answer. You need to be able to go back in there and solve whatever questions lingering in the back of your brain, because and that's the real pull of games like Immortality. Like it
Mhm.
leaves you questioning things where like you when you put the game down, you have to go back and like
Yeah.
see what you have missed, or like see if you can find that answer. And if you don't, it keeps going. If you don't find the answer in your next playthrough or your next one. And on that subject of mulling things over, there's actually one question about a certain character that
Uh-huh.
I think you might know who I'm leaning towards. I need to know, what was the reason for the one in
Mm.
Immortality? What was the purpose of having a character like that in this game?
Mm. It's a great question. I think um yeah, I'm curious what you make of her presence, I guess.
I I think she is incredibly unsettling. And I think that's the purpose, because there's a lot, like, I think her being there is an obstruction. And it's a
Mm,
really, that's what really makes it unsettling, because Ronald had mentioned that every time that her presence would be there, his controller would vibrate
mhm,
and he would have to look for something in the scene. It's an obstruction that really makes, like, it steals your attention from what's
mm,
going on, and it makes you question things really differently. So seeing the one appear in scenes and sort of manipulate the scene and create something different, change the narrative, almost felt like she was trying to push you away from
mm,
the answers. And that's what really made me unsettled by her presence. And I wonder if that was what your intention was with making a character like that.
mm. I love that. I love that description of her. I think, when it comes to the one, it's probably the thing that we want to answer the least questions about, because I think it is kind of that thing of, there is there is an unsettling ambiguity to her. And especially if you haven't discovered all of her, various appearances, you may have more questions than other people. So, um, I can speak to my feelings towards her, which is maybe I wouldn't say is like the game's, intention with her. Um, but when I'm drawn to a scene with the one, I think what I'm fascinated by is her vulnerability, her desire to speak to us, the player, um, like her love of humanity and her love of the arts. I think just having that peek behind the curtain is such a fascinating thing. It's like we're seeing into like the interiority of not just this one character, Marissa Marcel, but of it reveals so much about the making of film, the what it means to be an artist. Um, you know, who gets a legacy, who gets to live on forever, um, and who do we attribute, great art to? Who gets that credit? Who is immortalized?
Mm.
So there's yeah, I think that's hopefully ambiguous enough of an answer that
Oh no, I
I
definitely think it's a good answer. I appreciate not like wanting to say a lot, because obviously, like, you don't want to take away the ambiguity of the one. Personally, I've
Mhm,
always found a fascination when it comes to characters that almost, I don't want to say break the fourth wall per se,
mhm,
but they talk to you, the player.
mhm, mhm,
They talk to you. They can almost see behind the glass of the screen.
mhm,
It's this sense of power
mhm,
over the game and over the story that none of the other characters have. And it's a
mhm.
sense of, and it's what makes characters like that so unsettling to me, because it almost feels like they have so much like leverage over what
Ooh,
happens, over the narrative that's told, over the things that, over our perspective of how we interpret the game. Because obviously, when you go through more of the one scenes, when you find more of her and you see more of her presence and what she has to say and the insight that she gives, you look at everything so differently. And those kind of characters that have insight, that exist outside of that border, they
mhm.
have so much knowledge that, like, it's so attracting. It's so like, I guess you could say, like, magnetic.
Mm, I love that description. I love that. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
It's great. No, I love characters like that, especially like, I don't know if you play Undertale. Sans is definitely like, for as much as for much as he is a meme on Tumblr, he's
Yes,
also a very powerful character in the world of Undertale,
100%.
because
100%.
he has so much knowledge over the timelines and like the
Mhm,
systems of Undertale. And it's a sense that, and like, despite how like his lazy disposition, it creates this sense of fear. But
yeah,
yeah,
it does. You're, like, not ready for what he's gonna you're, like, dreading what he's gonna say because you don't know if it's gonna,
absolutely.
like, affect you, the player, or if it's going to
Yeah.
affect someone in the story. You don't, there's so much you don't know. So I love thinking of the one as the sands of immortality. It's very funny to me.
That's actually a really good comparison.
That's awesome.
So, I believe we are about to start wrapping up. So,
Mhm.
I have two more questions for you.
Okay.
And these questions are basically just the final things, the final bow on this little interview. So, first of all, I wanted to know, when Immortality finally released, what did that payoff feel like? What did it finally feel like to show off the project you had been working on after it was done?
Oh my gosh. It was like a roller coaster of emotion. I can't, it was one it was like one of the most vulnerable things I've ever done because here you are like pouring your heart and soul and blood and sweat and tears and everything into this thing, and then you give it to people, and and you don't know what they're going to say, and like, a lot of having come from journalism, a lot of my former peers and people I really respect and admire and value their input were going to be playing this game. Um, and it was terrifying. I had no idea what to expect. I was also so grateful to be, having pushed the green button. It's out there. It's like, oh my God, I can take a breath finally. But it was immediately like this. We were just extremely lucky and blessed to have such amazing reviews come immediately, same day. And so there was like this like tidal wave of like, whoa, like all of this feedback, all of these, people having thoughts and opinions and all this. And it was amazing and everything was great. So I was like, what is going on? Like, I feel like I'm in like this fantasy world right now. Um, but and then it was like, I think the thing that we don't talk about as much is like it was also really it was hard because it was like this thing is done. Like, what do I do with myself? What do I focus on? And you see the negative things and it's hard not to like, you can see like 10 nice things about the game and then you see one negative one. It's hard to like not let that
Absolutely.
outweigh the other things. So I
For
think something
sure.
we don't talk about as much in the games industry is like that post-release low that I think a lot of us can end up in, where it's like there's all this amazing things going on around us, but it's like your adrenaline is so high leading up to that there's naturally, kind of a lull that comes after that. And it's like anyone that's like you've ever worked on like a really big assignment, like a really big essay or something, and you finally turn it in and it's done. It's like,
A sense of
whoa, like
relief,
what am I?
but it's also like,
It's
what do I do now?
bittersweet.
What do I do in my
Yeah.
life?
It's super bittersweet. And it's like, and I think I had a lot of like mentors and people that I like talked to sort of throughout this time. They were like, yeah, this is the thing no one talks about, but we all go through it and you're super normal for feeling like this. So I think, now that it's been a little over, let's see, almost 2 months. It's been a month and a half since the game has been out. We're still in the swing of things, developing, the mobile build um and working on, post launch stuff, just like trying to like get the game in more people's hands and expand on sort of our audience and things like that. So there's still stuff to do, but it was really kind of a roller coaster of emotion. I was like I had happy tears and sad tears and then happy tears again. It was like it was a total whirlwind, but ultimately such an amazing process.
Absolutely. It's almost like content creation in a sense because
Mhm.
you like, especially when you're doing like a big project or a big video series, you put so much passion, you put so much love into the projects that you create, and you inevitably have to realize the fact that your work is going to be criticized because you
Mhm.
put it out there for people to see, you put it out there for people to watch, and ultimately criticism is going to come.
Mhm.
Most people are kind enough to give words of like that. They can see the passion, they can see the
Mhm.
they give you positive feedback. And then there are some that give you critiques, and then there are unfortunately some that will give you nothing but banter, nothing but
Right.
like hateful comments, and like which you
Right.
don't pay attention to those. But it's
Yeah.
really the critiques that you really take into, because part of you thinks that you should have seen that. Like
Mm,
you should have seen like those critiques when you were making the project. You think you
mm,
want it to be perfect, but unfortunately nothing is perfect. But above everything, everyone sees the passion that you put into a project, and that's really
yeah.
the most important aspect, because they know it then shows how much it means to you.
Yeah. And I think it's a testament to the work that people are, engaging with it so seriously, and like in a way whether that comes out in praise or critique, like that's a testament to the project itself. And so I think that stuff is there. Reading that kind of stuff is, there's nothing I would ever really go back, it's not like something I would go back and change. It's more so just like, that's a different perspective that like i I personally don't have. And so there's always something to learn from it. There's always something to glean from, the way in which different people engage with the game, and different people's tastes. And Immortality is a very specific type of game,
Right.
in within video games itself. Like, not all gamers are playing, FMV games, which I'm very cognizant of. I think, what's been exciting is a lot of people have said this is their first Sam Barlow game that they've ever played. Um, so
It's
that's really
mine.
cool to me. Is it really? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it actually is my first ever Brolo game, so it definitely left a really good impression of the company that he
That's
runs.
awesome. Oh, that makes me so happy. That's great. That's exactly what we wanted. I mean, I think we wanted something that felt approachable and didn't feel that was like really accessible, that people could kind of be like, I'm gonna play this weird experimental arty game, and and take a chance on it, and hopefully people liked it. And I think, a lot of people did. So
Absolutely.
that's cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think everyone in the staff team, especially you, should be extremely proud of what you made and the work that put into Immortality, because it definitely shows. It definitely shows the amount of like sophisticated execution that there was when it was came to the gameplay elements, to the tension that was spread throughout, and most importantly, the amount of like I can imagine the amount of work that actually went into it compared to like the actual product, because games are usually like about like an app like maybe like at most like maybe 5 hours of gameplay, like at the very least, and then there's like like years worth of development that went into making what can be completed in 5 hours. So it
Yeah.
just goes to show the amount of like effort that you all did.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. And yeah, no. So I think that is going to be where we wrap up our interview. Natalie Watson, I need to thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time and giving us your time and showing us about like what was going on with Immortality and your perspective on all of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reaching out. And it was such a fun chat. Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. It's